Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Founder Fireside Chat, championing the RevOps Revolution with LeanData founder and CEO, Evan Liang. And we're really excited to have Evan here today. In the past, we've had Henry Schuck from ZoomInfo join us and talk about his journey to taking ZoomInfo public. We've had Kyle Porter from SalesLoft talk about the evolution of his business into a unicorn. We've had Scott McCorkle chat about the journey of getting ExactTarget purchased by Salesforce and what that meant. And we're really excited to have Evan here today to chat with us, not just about championing the RevOps revolution, but also share a little bit of his story. Evan, thank you so much for being here.
Really excited to be here. Huge fans of MSP.
We are pumped to have you. And as Evan mentioned, today's event is hosted by the team at Modern Sales Pros. So for those of you who don't know, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest community for revenue leaders. Those are individuals who are in sales management roles, sales and revenue operation roles, and the related supporting disciplines. Our mission is to create an environment for our 22,000 and growing community members where they can answer the questions they'd otherwise struggle to solve on their own. We do that through bringing on amazing panelists and amazing conversations with folks like Evan. We do that through a robust online discussion. And in the future, we're really excited to get back to doing some in-person events. Everything that we do is free for our community members. And those of you who aren't members who are on right now, you will be invited to join shortly afterwards. But as I mentioned at the outset, today's session wouldn't be possible without the sponsorship of LeanData. MSP has worked with LeanData for quite some time, and it's really been exciting to see them grow and to see their evolution as a business. And they really are an operating system for a lot of the challenges that we face as leaders in revenue operations and sales leadership. And that's why we're really excited to have Evan, who's also been a longtime advocate for MSP here. But before we give Evan a chance to introduce himself, just a few housekeeping notes for everybody that's here today. Couple things. First and foremost, please do use the Q&A panel. We're going to be taking questions at the end, but as questions do come up, please do throw those in the question and answer panel. In there, you can also upvote questions. And also the first question that's always asked, when will the recording be available? The recording will be up on the Modern Sales Pros YouTube channel, usually about 24 hours afterwards. In addition to that, we'll put the post-event page up on our Modern Sales Pros website. There you can see the key takeaways and highlights of this conversation. But enough about MSP, enough about housekeeping. Evan, we're really, really excited to have you here. If you can, just go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us the story of Evan up until you got the idea to found LeanData.
Sure thing. Well, the first thing to know is my journey to RevOps started really early. So I was an industrial engineering major. So for those folks in the ops world, it's all about processes and efficiency. The guy who hates standing in line, hates standing in traffic because I always think there's a better way to do something. So that's just my personal mentality. So that was what I studied in college. Coming out, I actually had a pretty eclectic background, so I was fortunate. I actually joined the other side of many people out here. I was actually a VC straight out of college. So I joined a firm called Battery Ventures. That was my first job at college, doing basically cold calling to into founders to find out folks who needed money. So I did that for a couple of years. And found my passion for entrepreneurship really helping founders turn companies around during the dot-com bust. So I found out I was really, really good at kind of operationalizing things and making companies work. Took that experience in turnarounds and venture capital, worked as a product manager at some bigger companies like eBay and Microsoft. And that kind of led me to the experience prior to founding LeanData.
Oh, excellent. I have a soft spot in my heart for former Microsofties as well, Evan. So we can chat about that as well, what the Ballmer years were like. Maybe that's over beers sometime. Well, folks, we've got Evan for about half an hour today. I'm going to give you a quick overview of what we're going to go through, and then we're going to drop the slides and just really start to chat. Evan's going to give us a little bit more of the founding story and how LeanData came about after hearing his background. We're going to talk about a few things. First, Evan was, I think, one of the earliest, if not the earliest proponent of this term revenue operations. He's seen it really since, maybe even the early 2010s. So we'll talk about that and what that means and how Evan's seen it evolve. We'll talk about enterprise selling and how that's evolved in the role that data plays in that. We'll also dive into the notion of speed to lead. I think we hear this a lot, but Evan's got some pretty unique perspectives on that he's going to share. And then finally, we'll take questions from the audience and talk a little bit about the island of misfit toys that is operations and sales and founding companies. And so with that, Evan, I mean, let's jump into it. So you're at Microsoft, you're doing some pretty awesome things, and then you get the idea for LeanData. Like, how did it come about?
Yeah, so I mean, the story of LeanData has always been about solving customer pain points and building a more efficient sales and marketing stack. And so, like most entrepreneurs, your first customer is yourself. And so, I was actually passed at no longer at Microsoft, but I was at a small startup called Caring.com, and I was general manager and VP of product, and I was building a sales and marketing stack there. Started with Salesforce, and we were bringing in Marketo. And at that point in time, the systems just weren't working the way I wanted it to work. And we ran into a lot of data and process challenges. And so, I became ops essentially. We didn't have an ops team. I dove in, like basically wearing my kind of industrial engineering hat and also product management, was like, hey, there's got to be a better way to make all this work. And so we solved a bunch of challenges around like dupes, around fuzzy matching. We had some process issues around how the sales and marketing teams were aligning. So a lot of data and process issues, and I solved it for my last company, and I saw all the benefits of just making the sales and marketing team so much more efficient, and finally able to use marketing nurtures and all that stuff. And that's the light bulb moment for me when I was like, wait a second, if I have these challenges and yet I have engineering product resources, I bet you a lot of other companies are going to have the same challenges. If I can solve it for myself, can I solve it for others? And that was the genesis for how I decided to spin out, start LeanData, and just had a passion for helping companies really solve these little challenges that other people haven't thought of. And LeanData has always been kind of a pioneer in that. And again, it starts with the customer pain points. And that's why we identify really with the ops folks. Ops people are problem solvers, and that's kind of what we are. That's why we were the first to solve lead to account matching. It wasn't like we set out and said, hey, we need to solve lead to account. It's like a bunch of customers came to us with this pain point. And we're like, that's really interesting. No one else does that. And I can see why you need to have that solved. And so we went about doing that. And then we got into routing, and then increasingly we're solving more of these pain points around automation for a lot of our customers. And so it's always been the same thing. Twists and turns along the way, but it's always been the same thing. Make sales and marketing more efficient, and then just really focus on customers' pains.
Well, I think we hear that a lot from founders, right? There's not like maybe one moment where the apple falls from the tree. They just solve a pain that they've had, and then it turns out that there's a business there. What was the stack like if you rewind the clock to when you were trying to get all this connected? Because I mean, I think LeanData does some pretty awesome stuff, but absent LeanData, rewind it to before there was a LeanData, how the heck did you do? You said fuzzy matching, lead to account. There was a bunch of things like that in Marketo and the CRM, which of course didn't talk well.
Yep. Yeah, before LeanData, I mean, people used to do custom code or people. So the way I solved it at my last company is we actually hired a bunch of, they were called Odeskers, but they're now called Upworkers in the Philippines. And we just had human beings solve the fuzzy matching. So people were really good at because I mean, if you think about the data problems of dedupe or lead to account matching, the algorithms back then were really, really basic. It was basic to like exact email domain, right? Exact email match. And we were just like, that's not good enough. You got a Gmail account and you got a corporate email account. And so we threw it at $3 an hour to people. And they were really good at it. They could be like, oh yeah, this is Bob Jones that belongs to HP. They're the same folks. And we did that over and over again. And that made our problem a lot easier. So our sales reps didn't have to do it. Now, LeanData doesn't use people anymore because over time we use basically the matches over time, applied some basic machine learning. We're not calling ourselves an AI company, but it's basic machine learning to be like, hey, how can we build a better algorithm to do that? And so, yeah, to your point, Richard, you're exactly right. People do solve this today. Your choices are you can have your sales reps do all this work, which sucks, and that's not a good use of their time, or you can do some like cheap coding or stuff like that, or you can build a best of breed solutions that's been used over and over again and custom built for solving these problems.
Yeah, and I know the MSP audience really like the question that we always get is like, how the heck do you get salespeople to put stuff into Salesforce? And it's like, it's kind of a challenge, right? You want them on call. So I think that this is great. Well, Evan, I want to dive a little bit deeper into this idea of RevOps. You were really early to this term, and I think when I was doing some research, it was this.
Our lights went off, but we still have other lights. So
No, no worries, no worries. So I mean, I think as early as like 2013 and 2014, I'd seen that you were talking about this. How did that click for you? As this is something different in an evolution of what we're doing today?
yeah, so I think we were very fortunate on early in LeanData because we were kind of pioneers in solving a lot of categories. We've got to work with a lot of forward-thinking companies, and we started seeing companies adopt kind of this notion of RevOps because they were realizing that you couldn't just have the silos. You couldn't just have sales ops and mark ops. You need to start thinking about the holistic customer journey. So one of our early customers that I think really started thinking about things differently was a company called Okta. You guys all know them for the identity thing, and they really called it BizOps back then. And they were just trying to take a very different mentality for like, let's look at the entire customer journey. How can we solve this and break down silos and define this great journey? And that made a lot of sense to us. And we saw more and more customers realizing that working silos wasn't going to work for them, and it wasn't to deliver that great customer experience that they needed. And so everyone was calling it different names, but they were all trying to do the same problem, which was figure out how to break down the silos, build that integrated experience. And it really fomented itself kind of in the SaaS industry, where in the SaaS company, right, it's no longer, it's not a transaction. You don't sell something and then forget about it and ship the product. You've got to actually implement the customer. You've got to nurture them. Everyone's talking about net retention these days. That's a huge topic. Well, that means you have to think about the holistic journey. And that's where this concept of RevOps really started coming across. I think the key thing, again, is similar to my intro. It starts with the pain point. What are you trying to solve? I think oftentimes with a lot of people with RevOps these days, they think of it as just a title. I just do an organizational thing. And I think that misses the point. It's more, don't worry about the title. Figure out what the process is and what is the pain point you're trying to solve for your go-to-market machine. And from there, you start thinking about, then it starts making sense. And the other thing about the thing that for ops is, ops people are actually more similar. So whether you're sales ops, mark ops, or CX ops, you're actually more similar in your mentality, your thinking ability. That's why those folks naturally can work together much better than, quite frankly, maybe your sales and marketing team, who actually think quite differently for a variety of reasons. And bringing those folks together makes a ton of sense. So that's why we saw it really early on with some of our leading customers. And as we were trying to solve their go-to-markets, we started realizing that when the ops teams work better together, you end up building this better machine. And that's why we started advocating it, because we're like, this is making sense and we're seeing best in class. And we're kind of passionate about saying, similar to MSP, when you see something working for some of your customers, you want to bring it to everyone else. And that was kind of our goal.
Well, you hit on a whole lot there, and I think you touched on this a little bit. Like RevOps can be a little bit of a loaded term, right? Like it can be, oh, we needed a promotion path for the person that was in sales ops, and this, just like we promote the VP of sales to CRO, cool, we'll make this person RevOps, but it's largely the same. What does RevOps mean to you? If you can put a definition on it, like what does it actually mean when LeanData talks about RevOps? What is that? What would some things, what does it look like? What does it feel like?
Yeah, for me, it starts with, everything's around people, process, and tech, right? But I think for the people perspective, the most important thing on RevOps is the mentality. I think there are different folks, and when they think about ops, how do they think about mentality? First, you have the little guys who've been doing ops forever. They're more like Salesforce admins, right? So they're more like, hey, something's broken, I go and fix it. I think the true notion of RevOps are people who are going to take a very proactive approach to defining how to build a really efficient process. And so that's the first thing, is the mentality. The second thing is folks to break down the silos and think about the end-to-end process. So the difference between sales ops and RevOps, in my mind, the sales ops just focus on what's best for the sales team. And sometimes that's suboptimal for the rest of the organization when you think about from stack perspective. So the RevOps is someone who has then the opportunity to think about the end-to-end thing. How am I going to think about what works for demand gen? We kind of talk about it as like a relay race and handoffs, right? When we think about RevOps, the handoffs, passing the baton between demand gen to mark ops to sales ops, to RevOps. to SDRs. Someone who wants to think through that end-to-end process, think through all those handoffs, then you're thinking more of a RevOps from a process perspective. And then lastly, also from a technology, how are you going to integrate all those technology stacks together, not just the stuff that your AEs use or your SDRs use. Who's going to start thinking about, well, what are the implications for one change in one system over across the entire stack? So thinking about the entire RevOps stack instead of just sales stack versus MarTech stack. So that's, to me, is when people are really doing RevOps well, is they think about those things at that level across the end-to-end journey versus, hey, I just have a RevOps title, but yeah, day to day, I'm just doing sales ops.
Yeah,
That's
just running reports for the VP of sales and making sure that the system's talking. Now, that's great. And Evan, has that evolved? Has your thinking on that evolved really over the past, let's call it 10 years, in terms of what RevOps is and what it means to actually, do RevOps the right way, or has it been largely consistent?
No, it definitely has evolved. Like I said, as we learn from some of our customers, it's also evolved within LeanData. I think itself, we have this thing called LeanData on LeanData, and for us, it really
That's meta right there.
exactly. It's like drinking our own champagne. And so we have also had to evolve the types of folks that fill those roles and to make that successful. We've usually filled it with a lot of former customers. So we try to learn from out there who's doing it the best, and then we kind of can convince them, hey, come join us, and kind of bring that mentality internally as well. And so, yes, we've kind of evolved thinking about it. I think like a big area that we really want to push on is, a lot of RevOps initially was sales and marketing. You got to really think about CX, right? So how to actually introduce that all the way through and make sure that entire flow works really, really well.
I think that's an important and overlooked part. And I think the pandemic has forced companies to think a little bit more about defending their customer base versus the bringing on new logos. And that's an area, even in conversations in the MSP community, RevOps, that's really like, there's a lot of green field there for RevOps to support and call, maybe it's CS ops like functions there. You touched on this. You touched on this notion of like the handoff process and all of that kind of throughout. There's a lot of friction. And when we think about enterprise selling, right, the bigger the deal price, the more people are involved in the buying committee, the more people are involved on the selling side. LeanData actually started with a lot of enterprise folks and have started to do a bunch of work in maybe more traditional mid-market companies. How have you seen that evolve throughout your time at kind of at the helm at LeanData?
Yeah, so I would say it's actually, I would actually reverse it a little bit, Richard. We actually started with the mid-market. So the mid-market guys were actually really the innovators around RevOps because it's easier for them to change.
True. Yeah.
And so they were the first folks to really innovate it. And now we're seeing it much more in the larger enterprises, and they're calling it more like digital transformation. So the bigger companies, every once in a while, every 5 years, they look through their entire processes and they're realizing that they can really learn a lot of stuff from some of the early innovators and fast-growing companies. And they're doing a lot of digital transformation. But the reason that's driving the digital transformation, I think, is what's driving a lot of people on the phone, is the amount of complexity that's happening in the go-to-market. And that's one of the bigger drivers around RevOps, is the fact that, it used to be really straightforward. You had like inbound, you had outbound, but then ABM got in there. You have these channel strategies, you have like speed to lead. There's all these different go-to-markets. And that complexity is what's driving the need for organizations to think much more operationally and data driven than in the past, where they could really manage it almost by gut feel. So that's what we're starting to see. And that's why the largest companies out there are like, wait a second, we have to rethink our processes, our systems. And that's driving a lot of great change to look under the hood and start thinking about these processes in a much more methodical way. And what I'm really excited about is I believe as people become much more process driven, I'm excited about ops taking a much more first having a seat at the table, but in the future, in my mind, the ops-oriented people are going to be your future CROs and CMOs. They're going to be the ones who are really driving it because they can really understand the complexity of the process. You can't just manage it by touch and feel. You're going to have to take a data-driven, process-oriented way of doing it. And I'm excited to see that the enterprises are starting to move that way. And not just the enterprises, but also the large consulting shops. We're seeing the Deloittes, the Accentures, BCGs of the world in these companies helping them make that transition. And that's exciting because I think the opportunity, maybe one way to think about this is, I also think like, there's the old sayings like, 50% of my marketing spend is going to waste. I just don't know which 50%. Or only 50% of my reps are hitting quota. I'd like to get to a point where those aren't the norms and benchmarkings and okay anymore. I'd like to get to the point where, people do hit like 80%, 90% of folks hit quota, and we know marketing ROI, and we know what's driving our business. Because, like I said, I hate waste. So I'd love to see a place where we don't have as much of it.
Well, I think there's a couple points here that you made, and I'd like to double click into that a little bit. Like,
Yeah.
I think it was either Forrester or Gartner, the average enterprise marketing stack is 91 tools.
Right.
The sales tech stack, now this isn't considering our friends and customer success, is about 17. Like that tooling sprawl definitely gives rise to a lot of these areas where crashes can happen at the intersection. And we've heard maybe RevOps as a solve for that. What's the role of ABM, right? We hear about ABM and account-based selling a lot. Should people care about that? Is that a new thing? Is that something that's just a new manifestation of what maybe some of the RevOps work? Like, how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think ABM is just, I think it's pretty natural. Most companies, if you talk to salespeople, they're like, there's nothing new here. We always had our target accounts and we focus on them and we sell to them. I think from a technology perspective, it's now easier for marketing to align around those type of things. So like, absolutely the first step in ABM is you got to have lead to account matching. You have to match your leads and account. But I mean, even though we were the pioneers around that, I was also like, this is a no-duh kind of problem. It's kind of like, of course, the lead should have always matched the accounts, but so you just solve these basic problems. And similarly for ABM, and so of course, the more tighter marketing and sales can be aligned around target accounts and orchestrate that journey, the better. I think digital certainly in the pandemic, it's accelerated that, where a lot of those touch points are happening out there, so that you do need a more data-driven perspective to do it. And like you said, in the enterprise, you have a bigger buying committee. So I think there are trend lines to make ABM be more successful, but it's not a new concept that it's all of a sudden like people didn't understand that, but the technology is enabling that. And I think to your point there, when we'll talk about this a little bit, I think maybe in the next topic, when we speak to, I do think people are running into problems these days in ops around having all this technology, having sync issues. We are seeing, I'll be honest, I am starting to see from some of our customers where your CRM and some of your systems are starting to slow down. You're having collisions, you're having a lot of processing issues and those type of things. And so I do believe as we kind of move into the next phase of automation of a lot of these things, these integrated tech stacks are more important. And that's why for our third topic around speed to lead, we really wanted to talk about that, because I am starting to see there is so much tech. Making it work together is better, not just adding more tech for the sake of adding more tech is key from an ops perspective.
Well, it's funny. I had this conversation a few weeks ago with the CRO at Terminus, and one of the things that we're starting to see, he and I both worked in we sold B2C marketing technology. So if you look at what happened in B2C marketing and B2C MarTech 10 years ago, it's just kind of catching up in B2B, where we've got these big tech stacks, we've got data sprawl, there is a real timeness that's missing, right? Back in mobile days, like there's a very limited window I have to engage with you. And we're starting to see some of those same trends pull forward, which kind of sets us up for our next point. Like, how does automation have to evolve to accommodate some of these speed to lead challenges? Because the tooling, like the stacks, aren't going to get smaller.
Right.
So how does automation need to evolve? And then what's the role of speed to lead to make sure that this actually happens and we can do what we need to do as revenue leaders?
Yeah, so I think the key thing is that the stacks have to start integrating and understanding how to play well with each other. And so I think partnerships are going to be very, very key. But I do think from an operation perspective, you're going to have a much finer data grading thinking of every single step in that process. Yeah. So I think 5 years ago, I didn't hear a lot from my customers around what's the processing time, what's time stamping every single step from when a lead gets submitted on a form all the way to a rep contacting them. We used to think of the biggest hurdle was the sales reps time and making sure they get followed up. But I have customers who are measuring at like the second and the minute level, even like how long does it take inside Salesforce? How long does it take before it gets routed? How long does it take before the rep gets notified? And you have to think through all that because there's just so much data coming in. And we learned a lot lot of these lessons kind of in and around the pandemic. These two of our largest customers that we signed up right beforehand were DocuSign and Zoom. And you can imagine, we literally signed them like 2 weeks before the pandemic hit, and their volumes just scaled immensely. And so we got this challenge, and we saw that when you pump tons of volumes into these systems, they started slowing down. You started having collisions, and we had to work with our customers to come up with different ways to do that. So I think it's integrating this tech stacks. There's going to be a rise of, there's questions of like, do you have to integrate or native applications? So one of the things advantages is like, are you part of a platform? Are you outside? Are you mirroring the data? I mean, there was different ways of, so if you think about a staff, let's think about a lead comes in, it goes into like your marketing automation system. That's got to then sync with your sales CRM system. Then you might have to do enrichment. So there's another API step. Then you go through a system like LeanData where we're like automating, orchestrating, figuring out your workflows and figuring out which rep goes to. Then it goes to like your rep. Then you got your sales engagement system. There's all these different points. And I think the winners in the future, in order to do speed to lead, you got to look at every single step and optimize it and think about the holistic. And that's why we talk about RevOps, is think through the whole entire process and think that every single system works together. And oftentimes, a lot of our ops people, the ones who first put in their tech stack, the next thing they really want is auditability and understanding and metrics and understanding this. Because they want to be, ops people, like I said, are problem solvers. They want to understand, like, if something goes wrong, what is it? What's funny for us is oftentimes when we help people with their lead routing, sales reps will complain and they'll call us first. And we'll inevitably, out of like 95% of the time, we'll diagnose it and be like, it's not our system. Something happened over here in Salesforce, something happened over here in some sort of sync. But it's incumbent on the vendors to work together to figure that out. Because at the end of the day, we do help our customers solve that. And that's one of our value add is our consultant. And we always ask them, why do you call us? And like, you actually call us back because we call Salesforce and they don't say anything. We're like, okay. But we generally look at it, but it's incumbent as vendors to solve it because the pain point's still the same. The leads aren't getting to the reps. That's the pain point. Whether it's our system or not, it doesn't matter. We got to help you solve the holistic thing through the holistic system and build better tools for you to look across the entire way. So
let's dig in there a little bit because I think that's a really interesting point. When LeanData is bringing on a new customer or working with them, how many of them have actually a sense of each one of those systems, right? Each one of those touches. Do they have it mapped out on paper? Do they have an idea of it? Or are they just like, yeah, we got to get the leads from the website into the seller's hands. Y'all figure it out. How does that? How have you seen with that?
Yes, so I think some people, this is where the RevOps mentality comes into. The ones who think holistically, some of them actually do have it all mapped out. It's really, really impressive. They show me the stack and everything.
For them.
Yes, but the other organizations, they don't know. So when we start onboarding them, this is some of the enterprises, we'll ask them questions. They're like, I have no idea. That's some other team over there. That's not my job. And you're like, well, we need to go talk to that other team because there's a dependency or there's an application around it. And so I think that's when we're saying, per our original topic, organizations are starting to realize in order to make their whole system work together, they have to think more holistically. And so oftentimes in our implementations, we will work with customers, we will have to talk to multiple groups, and we'll help them try to figure this all out together. This is the blessing and curse of our system at LeanData, where we're kind of sitting in the middle of it, and people orchestrate it. So we have dependencies both on inputs and outputs, and so we try to help our customers figure this out and try to help them map the organization. Some companies are better at it than the others, but we are seeing all companies recognizing the need to do this, and that's kind of this movement that we're all on the journey together.
It's like, you buy an amazing solution and you also happen to get this group therapy component as well, which sounds, I'm sure some of those big organizations, that's probably what it feels like, right?
Well, that's the funny part is, I do think a lot of, we do have a bunch of customers come to that. Part of the reason they work with LeanData is because we work with the best of the best. And they're like, we want to talk to your other customers and learn from them. Who is doing it better than us? And the funny part is this problem solving mentality. The companies that are doing it the best are the ones who are constantly asking us that they think someone else is doing it better. quite fascinating. The ones who aren't doing it that well, they don't ask any questions. They're just trying to like figure out their fire drill. And then the best are like, who else is doing it better? What else can I learn from them? We're like, we highlight people to you, but they're always, like I said, they can always learn from each other. And so bringing these people together, just like MSP, this is the great thing of it, right? You want to bring the best minds together, and we can all learn from each other, and make everyone better together.
I think that's such an interesting point too, but there's probably something to it, right? Ignorance is bliss. Like I didn't realize that I had a problem. I didn't realize that I had a problem with this. And there's actually a comment in the Q&A about the audit log. And it's like, I didn't realize we had a problem between website enrichment and it shows up on a prioritized list for a BDR. Oh, cool. I've got an audit log now.
Yes.
Better work on that.
Transparency is very good. And actually, the people who are furthest back are, per your point, are ignorant. The ignorance is bliss in the sense that they don't even know that there are solutions to solve their problems here, right? That's like for one of our biggest challenges from a marketing perspective is telling them there is a better solution out there. There is a better way, and you should think about it. And so that's my biggest go-to-market challenge is actually convincing those that don't know. So.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And it's obviously one of those things too, where the more fractured that is, right? Think about your big, maybe late majority organization where they're like, no, that's, Sally's problem. And then Sally points to Steve. And it's kind of tragedy of the commons in some instances where the problem's simultaneously too big and too small. This is great, Evan. Let's jump in to take some questions here that we've got. We got some good questions coming in live. We had some good questions on during registration. First question, and Evan, I think you've got a unique perspective on this, but let's talk about the ideal organizational structure. This comes up a lot. Where should RevOps live? Should it report to the COO, CRO, CEO? Like, how do you think in this ideal world, where does RevOps live?
Yeah, so I think in my mind, there is no ideal because it's going to depend on who in the organization really cares about that end-to-end journey. I've seen it live well under a CRO that kind of owns that entire span. I've seen it work under, like in the Okta's case, it was under the finance org. I've seen it under COO. So you need to figure out, like you had mentioned, Richard, who has that right mentality at the executive level that's going to think through that entire end-to-end journey, right? Because like you said, there are many CROs that are more chief sales officers. In that case, it probably doesn't work that well because they're going to slant them much more to sales ops than is true RevOps. And so, but there are CROs who do take that expansive thing. So it's up to each organization to understand which executive can push that and pioneer around that. If you have multiple executives that are working their silos, then maybe a centralized organization like finance or G&A or COO makes a ton of sense. And so for me, I think RevOps in our organization technically reports up into the CRO, and he's just well. But because we want to be LeanData on LeanData, I spend a lot of time personally doing that, right? Because I'm passionate around the space and I have an operational mindset. So it's again, don't think about the hierarchy. Think more about a mentality and who's going to be able to drive towards the right problems.
I think that's a great point, and that's come up a few times in other conversations about RevOps. It matters a little bit less where it will live and more that person can actually be the wind behind the sails of revenue operations versus it being like, no, dogmatically it must report to the whatever. Good. So this is actually a great question coming in from Charlie Moss live. We were chatting a little bit about post-sales and customer success operations. Is that something that you think should always be included in revenue operations?
I think it depends, again, on the organization and how they're set up around that. So maybe align it with the metrics. If your CRO owns net retention, and that's one of the metrics he owns, then absolutely. But if you're not aligned with the right metrics, putting the CX ops org within that RevOps org may actually hurt because it won't get the right prioritization from it. So I think aligning people with their incentives and their mentality will help determine what things belong together. Ideally, long term, at the holistic corporate level, I do think you want to move towards towards that, but some organizations just aren't ready for that. And in force fitting again, and this is the theme, force fitting the organizational structure to match an ideal state that doesn't reflect the organization, you're just going to hurt yourself versus waiting until you get that level of alignment and then putting it together.
And I think another point on that too, Evan, would be, really think about what the customer's experience is at each step of the journey and come up, this is a little bit more first principles than just RevOps, but think about what your key metrics are and where the friction is and how you can deploy, Evan, back to the people, process, and technology to make it a more frictionless experience. And then that maybe helps Charlie, you start to think about how to answer this question most appropriately for your organization.
Exactly.
So the next question coming in is more around sort of early stage companies, and there's a few on this, Evan, but I think how can really small organizations, think maybe a few sellers or maybe a seed to Series A company, really get a handle on some of the challenges that RevOps solves before they have a dedicated person in place for it?
Yeah, so a lot of my smaller companies, what I generally see is, again, find the person who's most curious around these challenges and has a passion for solving it. I've seen a lot of SDRs become great RevOps leaders over time. I've seen SDR managers. They are sitting in the seat. They understand the process, and so therefore they can transition to do it. Salesforce admins can make that transition. So the industry hasn't been around that long, and like I said, the folks that have been in the seat a long time, they tend to be Salesforce admins, right? So you want to find people who, like, again, have that mentality, and it could come from anywhere. It could be marketing, it could be AEs. I've seen various folks. Just go find someone, because when you're in a really early stage, you want a jack of all trades. You want a person who is willing to roll up their sleeves. They run into a problem and they're not going to be like, well, no, I didn't go hire someone to do that because you don't have the budget for it. You want someone to be like, no, I'm going to try to go Google this and figure this out. I'm going to maybe take some Salesforce Trailblazer lessons. I'm going to get certified in a bunch of technology. I'm going to go to a conference. I'm going to ask, go out in the communities. You're looking for someone who's more of a can-do, take charge, and figure it out. Worry less around what they've done and more, can they solve your problem for you? And once they solve one problem, they're going to solve another, and eventually they are doing ops. Actually, in my story, like I said, I was joking. I did ops, even though I've never had an ops in my title, right? But I was just like, this problem really bugged me, so I'm going to go solve it, right? So it can come from anywhere.
I think there's a really interesting perspective, and we've talked about this with others on MSP, of that like mechanical engineering problem solving mindset actually does lend itself very, very well to an operations role, because you have like not, I don't want to say linear, but more of a process oriented thinking, versus maybe sometimes someone who's in sales who's not coming at it thinking like there's this revenue assembly line and there's cars on one end, or there's parts on one end and there's cars on the other, or in the revenue case, right, there's leads on one end and there's revenue on the other. How do we make that assembly line roll?
No, I agree. I think there's a lot of things we can learn from kind of, that's why I started off with, I was in industrial engineering, like what we've done with manufacturing and how we've kind of broken down assembly lines. I love those metaphors because it really is very similar to, like, what we had done from the artisans and crafts world to making manufactured goods. There's a lot of similarities for how the sales and marketing engine is going to evolve over time, I think. And we've seen that. I mean, one of the biggest things that's created the need for ops is role specialization, right? In the old days, like, the seller used to do everything himself. He got his own leads, he knocked on his own doors, he did everything. Now we've got SDRs, we've got inbound BDRs, MDR, SDRs. So we've really specialized this thing, and that's important. But then now we got to stitch it all together, and then that's where the world of operations came in, and that was my major. Industrial engineering was all about optimizing that manufacturing floor. Now we just need to optimize the sales and marketing engine.
And I think that's a great way to think about it. And kind of building off of this, we've talked at small company what the role of RevOps is. There's a few questions around at sort of a higher level. When you think about the revenue strategy of an organization, this could be the go-to-market strategy. This could be more just generally from a revenue strategy standpoint. What is the role of RevOps, or what should the role of RevOps be? And I think you mentioned this a little bit with, okay, you have a seat at the table. What does that actually mean?
Yeah, so I think what it means is you want to go from oftentimes when you first start off in ops, you're very reactive. You're just doing fire drills, right? So something's broken, the lead didn't get to the right place, or someone's tech they don't do it. That's what you start with, and then the evolution of that is to become proactive, pointing out problems and solutions and helping people make it more efficient. And I think long term, I think it's I mentioned earlier, I think RevOps teams could be the future drivers. You look at the whole holistic city, you look at the strategy, you look at the data, and you start designing the system instead of just fixing the system. And I think that's the evolution of where we're going. And in the future, I think people will be able to say, hey, look, based on our data, based on our ICP, based on what we're seeing, where success metrics on conversion rates, we think we should put more reps into this region, or we should, take these set of accounts and apply an ABM framework to these sets of accounts. We need to do more of an inbound process. They can start designing what your go-to-market looks like. Whereas today, it is more intuition. It's a test and try. I'm sure you guys, a lot of folks have seen it. The CRO goes to a conference, meets someone's like, hey, they said it's working for them, so we're going to try it tomorrow. It's not a data-driven way of doing it, versus like, hey, we analyzed a year worth of data. I mean, one of the most popular topics we always had at our conferences around ops is like Moneyball. People want to take that Moneyball mentality for it, and that's a great title. I've seen Moneyball used in multiple. I think Pete Kaczynski started using Moneyball to think about it, is because that's like, hey, let's think differently. The data, just because we've been scouting baseball players for the last 30 years doesn't mean that's the best way to do it. So how do we take a more data driven? And I think when the RevOps teams are the general managers and running the shops, that's when we know we've seen success.
There's a lot there, and I think the best quote from that entire film is, we're not selling jeans, we're trying to win baseball games. And it's this, but we've all been there, right? We've had the CEO that goes to the conference or reads the book and is like, oh, company X does it that way, we need to rebuild our entire revenue process to do this. Or I think the more common example we see is, oh, sales had a great quarter, let's double the quotas. Like, hold on, did the market double in size? Like, what happened here that would lead to that? And Evan, I think those are all really, really great points. We're actually in the home stretch here, Evan. So this is the last question, and we'd love to get this perspective from all the founders and all the high octane individuals we've had do fireside chats. Revenue ops, sales leadership, building a business, it's a little bit like the island of misfit toys. There's no one profile, there's no one set of background that guarantees success. And a lot of folks end up here from other places, non-traditional backgrounds and otherwise. For somebody that's thinking about either building a business, or for somebody who's thinking about really taking a hard pivot into an early stage startup, what's some advice that you would have for people that maybe don't fit a traditional mold?
Yeah, I think just find your pain points and find what you're passionate about, and then leverage your own strengths. So I think because everyone comes from different perspectives, think about what is it that you're really good at, and you might have an unfair advantage over other people, and double down on your strengths. And don't necessarily read all this. I have read a lot of those books and everything, but take anything you hear from other people with a grain of salt. My journey is going to be very different from someone else's journey. Like I said, I started as a VC, so that was a kind of backwards from a lot of folks. But I was able to leverage some of those strengths. So, for example, I was fortunate that I could raise money on two guys in the PowerPoint because I had relationships, right? That being said, I was in an engineering mindset, and I hadn't worked at some certain. I didn't have other leverages. I hadn't been in the RevOps world. I hadn't been in sales, so I had to learn those things along the way. So I think it's just follow your passions and figure out what is it that gives you an unfair advantage over the next guy who's looking for funding.
I think that's amazing advice. And with that, Evan, I know you're incredibly busy. I want to thank you so much for taking some time here today to share your story, the journey of LeanData, and what you see as the RevOps revolution with the MSP audience.
Well, thank you. Really appreciate you guys having me, and it's always fun to talk to MSP.
This was awesome, Evan. Take care, stay safe, and we'll chat soon.
Fantastic. Thanks, Richard.
Bye-bye.